JB, at what point in your life between cowboying on 6 continents, and there are only 7, if you guys forgot that, did you decide I'm going to sit down and write a book?
Um, it happened when I was in Mexico, which was that was the second to last place that I went. Mongolia was last, but when I was in Mexico, I kind of accidentally ended up in the middle of like a cartel turf war gunfight in town, and they weren't coming after me, but there was bullets flying around and people shooting thousands of rounds at each other in the streets of this little town, and I was laying on the floor. Um, I was staying in this kind of nicer stucco house, concrete walls, and I was laying on the floor below the windowsill, just basically because they told me to lay there so I didn't catch a stray bullet coming through the window. And I was laying on the floor, thinking, I could die at any point doing any of this stuff that I've been doing, and I don't want to take these stories to the grave with me, and I have not told all these stories to one single person. Like if I die tomorrow, I don't know that anybody will be able to essentially write my stories for me. So I never intended for it to be a book, really. It was just kind of a journal, I suppose, that I wanted it all written down and documented in case something happened. And then I wrote it all down, and it didn't take a whole lot of tweaking to just turn it into a book.
Yeah. Wow. It reminds me a little bit of Louis L'Amour, his life story. Have you ever read his life story, Education of a Wandering Man? It reminds
No,
me
I
of
haven't.
you. It's really good. He traveled the world. He was a boxer. He was well read, but he was like obviously a great cowboy writer. And I think most old timers would say they don't make him like that anymore. But you're an exception. Most people, I don't know how old you are, probably around the same age. I don't have a book to write. Most people our age don't have a book to write. But your book, which I have an old version of, you guys should go buy it, is absolutely worth the read. It is unbelievable. I think the problem is you have to write a sequel at the end of your life. You can't let this be your only book because you're going to have a lot more stories, I'm sure.
Well, this I've not publicly said this, and I guess until now, but I've got another one that's probably half written right now.
Really? I didn't know that. What's this one about?
This is all the stories and people that I met on the road traveling around the United States shooting music videos. So, again, it's kind of a journal, and we'll just see if what it takes to turn it. If it maybe it never will be a book, but I just started. I didn't want to lose these stories either because
Yeah.
I meet so many people, and I'm on the road so much, and I get to see ranches and backstages of venues and things like that that a lot of people don't get to see. So over this past winter, when I would get bored, I'd sit down and start writing out some of the stories of how I met these people, where we were shooting the video, what was going on at the time. So it's not wild international cowboy and stuff, but it's kind of the next chapter of my life, I suppose.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, I got an early copy of your book a few years ago. You sent it to me. I don't think you published it yet. I think this is a because
No, that there's only 10 of those ever made. So
I'm so honored. Wow.
there's only a handful of people that have those. So I don't think the internet even knows that those exist.
Well, because I just looked up your book and I saw, you obviously have the foreword from Colter Wall, which isn't in this version, and there's some more stuff that's like I think the acknowledgement wasn't written yet, and the dedication and stuff like that. I got the signature, that's the important part. But yeah, you it was so hard to put down. I mean, this is like quite a story for people who don't think there's adventure left in the world. Gotta read JB's book.
Yeah. There's still wild places to be found out there.
Yeah, 100%. And we wanted to talk today. We were chatting yesterday, and this, as you mentioned just now, the latest chapter of your life has been country music and cowboy music and traveling and filming these music videos on your channel, Dusty Vaquero. And I was telling you how my concept for the UNWON podcast which is very just loose. I just talk to people that I want to talk to, but I interview people who haven't been on a podcast before, like local legends. But you're a local legend who has been on a few podcasts. You've been on like Del Brisby's show, a few other big ones. So I think most of those podcasts, though, you've talked about your life experience and your travel. You know, you're a world traveling cowboy, working cowboy. So you talked about the book, you talked about your stories. We were talking, and I don't think you've ever really done a podcast on music and your approach to it, which is your new endeavor. So we figured, hey, let's just jump on and start recording and talk about that. Tell me a little bit about Dusty Vaquero.
When I finished writing my book, and then I finished editing it, that whole process took about 4 years. I wrote the whole book night calving for my grandpa. I would go out and check cows every hour and then come back in and sit down in the barn and write. So the whole book was written night calving, and then all of the editing was more or less done night calving. So it was 4 seasons of night calving that it took to write that. And once that was done, I didn't really know what to put myself into or what to pursue because I had been working so hard on that for so long that it once I finished, the travels in the book, it was pretty easy to kind of pour my energy into the book itself. And then once the book was done, I needed something else to kind of pursue. So um, I was taking a lot of photos and stuff like that, and kind of into photography, and I was I was running. I had a handful of friends that were musicians at that time, and I was just surprised that the world didn't know about them, or more people didn't know about them, because they're great musicians and great songwriters, and but they were just kind of being missed by the world because they're working cowboys, and they don't go to town that much. They don't have the time to tour. They probably don't put the effort into advertising like other people do. That's the way they make their living. So I thought there was kind of an underserved community, I suppose, of cowboy musicians, or just people working in agriculture that were musicians. And so a friend had mentioned to me at one point when I was in Alaska, said, photography's cool and all, but the world's really going towards video. And if you want to make something out of this, you should try and figure that out. So I had bought a camera that would shoot photo and video. It was a Sony A7 III, and I started just teaching myself on YouTube how to use it. And I started once I was somewhat confident in using it, I called up a few of my friends that were cowboys and musicians, and I asked them if they wanted to shoot some videos and just see what we could make out of it. And they all said yes. And I think in the first 2 or 3 months that I really decided, okay, I'm going to do this, I shot videos with 30 or 40 artists in the first couple months. So it took off quickly. And it was obvious to me that there was an underserved community there, I suppose, as far as content and media goes. So it just took off, and I just ran with it and spent the next 2 years of my life, more or less, living out of my van, driving around the United States, finding um, songwriters and musicians that live a life that they sing about.
Cowboy music, country music is very hot right now. Obviously, it's having a moment. You know, country music is resurging in a big way, but I do think that we've lost a little bit of the soul of what country music is about. In your book, one of the things I took away from it is that a lot of cultures cowboy, but they all cowboy a little bit differently. Is that true for cowboy music in different countries too?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you work with livestock or live with livestock, you spend a lot of time alone and away from town, away from other people, and because of that, it gives you a lot of time to think. And that doesn't make every um, herdsman or stockman a good musician, but the ones that naturally are have a lot of time to dedicate to writing and singing, and you're just out there by yourself all the time. Or poetry as well. Poetry is huge in the cowboy world. And I think a lot of that comes from being alone and being out in the middle of nowhere. So that's true regardless of where you are. Like in Mongolia, those guys um, famously do that throat singing, which is you know
Yeah.
very wild sounding stuff. And like in the Swiss Alps, all those guys yodeling up there while they're herding cattle through the mountains. And so there's very famous. I don't know that people necessarily realize that it's cowboy music, but most old forms of music come from, that's what most people did back in those days, was lived with livestock and tended their flock and whatnot. And so all the old folk songs and those, kind of ancient forms of music, they all come from herdsmen just being out there and singing to their livestock.
Oh, is Mongolia where you rode a reindeer? Is that part of your
It is.
life?
Yes. Yeah. Northern Mongolia, I lived with the Tsauden tribe for just a little bit, and they're the last people on Earth that still ride reindeer as their main source of transportation. So they have a pretty interesting life. They live in teepees. They just move with the grass, and they have their own very unique way of singing.
Do you think there'll ever be an international Dusty Vaquero? Would you take what you're doing to other countries?
Yeah, yeah, and that has been that's something I think down the road that I'd really
Yeah.
like to do is maybe combine the two things that I've done and and go get some of that and um, see if I can track down some musicians in other places. I mean, there it also seemed to me when I was out traveling all the time that you know they're almost more common. Certainly not professional musicians, not recorded, but like almost everywhere I went, there was guys when they were horseback, they were singing. So I don't think it would be that hard to go to these other countries and find guys, willing to kind of do it, record a video, I guess, even though they probably don't consider themselves musicians in any way.
If you don't record them, we might lose that sound forever. How much longer are they going to be doing that?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I've thought about, I, I think I may do a round two basically, at some point where I could go back to all the same countries I've already been to and just use those contacts that I have already. But I've also thought about maybe going to try and hit a different country on every continent. But if I do it this time, I would really like to film it. Either take a film
Yeah.
crew or figure out how to film it myself.
Oh, totally. You have to do that. That would be incredible. What do you look for when you work with an artist or you choose an artist that you're going to go film?
Well, kind of the framework of the whole thing is I just really like to showcase artists that um, have a strong connection to agriculture. So I've done plenty of videos with people that aren't cowboys or maybe not even ranchers in general, but their dad was, and they grew up, riding around in the truck while their dad was shoeing horses and stuff, and they've got songs about that. So that's kind of the connection between everybody is there's a strong connection to agriculture. But really, when I look at the music itself, I try and shoot with people that write their own songs, and um, doesn't really matter if they perform them or not. I've found quite a few artists at this point that have hardly ever played a show, or maybe they haven't played one ever. And a good example of one is Cade Hoffman. Probably quite a few people have heard of him now. He just opened all of Colter Wall's shows on his
Yeah.
last tour. But Cade Hoffman, when I met him, his family has a farm ranch in southern Colorado, and I went there and shot a video with him. And I don't know if he'd ever played a show, or I'm pretty sure he told me that he had only ever played his music for his family, and then he'd done a one video on his phone, which I happened to see. So we went and shot those videos, and he, was just getting started, and now he's he's headlining his own national tour. I think starting next month, and that was so in the 2 years that we've known each other. That's how fast progressed. So I don't the level of a there's no requirement of um, you know no accomplishment level needed. It could be a person that has never played for anybody else ever before, or it could be Colter Wall, who's played to thousands and thousands of people. It could be anywhere in between, but really, I just look for genuine songwriting and kind of songwriting that pertains to the agricultural way of life.
Colter is he grew up on a ranch in Canada, right?
Yeah, Colter's from Saskatchewan, and that's still what he's doing every day.
How did you connect with him?
I met Colter out in Elko at the Cowboy Poetry Gathering. That was probably, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Um, and it's kind of a funny story how I first met him. When I was in Mongolia, I hadn't heard anybody, I hadn't talked to anybody that English was their first language in probably 2 months at this point. And so I was just used to hearing very broken English or no English at all. And I went out to I was working for an outfitter at that time, and I went out to saddle the horses in the morning, and out of just off in the distance, I can hear somebody clearly singing, "A raven is a wicked bird," and I go, "Who is singing Colter Wall in Mongolia?" And I turn and I'm looking, and this guy had showed up. His name was George, and George was English, and he's singing Colter Wall while he's helping me saddle horses. And in that moment, I thought, man, if I ever meet Colter, I'm gonna have to tell him that story that I heard people singing his music out on the steppe in Mongolia. And so it just so happened it was, I don't know, 6 months after that I stepped out of the bar to go. I was smoking cigarettes in those days, and I stepped out to go smoke a cigarette, and Colter was standing right there. And I went over and I said, "Man, I guarantee you, I've got a story that you have never heard." And that was kind of the start. And we sat there and talked for quite a while, and I was telling him about all this traveling and stuff. And anyways, that was how we met and got to be friends. And then we just kind of stayed buddies ever since. And then I asked him to write the foreword to the book. So that's how it all came together.
He's kind of reclusive a little bit. He doesn't like to do a ton of media. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. He's just I mean, what little you see in the media of Coulter is basically exactly what you get in person. He's just kind of a quiet, stoic guy, and so yeah, I don't think he ever says more than he needs to say, and so I think because of that, he doesn't really go out and try and do a lot of media stuff.
You've told me hope this is okay to say, you've told me he's turned down Rogan a few times.
Yeah, I don't know how many times, but he certainly has. He when he did Dale, me and Coulter took my beat down minivan when we were in Vegas this past year, and Dale Brisby likes to give me a hard time about living out of a van. And I made a joke to Coulter because he told me he was going to do Dale's podcast. I said, "How funny would it be if we roll up in my smashed up minivan?" And he said, "That's a great idea. We should do that." So we pulled up. I took him over to that podcast, and so he talked about that on Dale's podcast that he had. Rogan's reached out a few times, I guess, and he just didn't have the time to do it, I guess.
Hmm. I remember when his music first came out, and he's kind of sounds like Johnny Cash, and he's got this real old soul voice, and he's very young when he first came on the scene. And it felt like a voice from another time that you don't really hear anymore. And it makes
Totally.
sense that he has agricultural roots because that's what you get from his voice is just something different. And I know, Johnny Cash when he's been described as like a voice from the center of the earth or something. And there's a quality to people who have life experience that you
Mhm.
just don't get from, and I'm not shading, it's great that country music is popular. I don't have a problem with that. I know every 90s country song on the radio, but there's something soulful that you get from people who have that life experience and bring that to their music. And it would be a shame to lose that heart and soul of what country music really is in the US.
Right. Right. Yeah, I 100% agree. And that's, you know, the also the Western, I mean, it's obviously because cowboys are popular, but even the music that's not necessarily um, cowboy, I suppose you could say,
Yeah.
it's still the music scene in Wyoming and Montana, Colorado, somewhat is really starting to kind of take off, and this is becoming a spot, I suppose. And I've never been to Nashville, or not in a business way. Um, but Nashville was kind of the center of country music for forever. Still, I mean, it
Yeah.
still is. But then back in the early 2000s, probably, or maybe mid 2000s, the red dirt scene in Texas started, or red dirt in Oklahoma, and then the Texas country scene started to pick up. And I think people started to see, oh, there's a different way to do this, and we don't have to do exactly what Nashville wants us to. And then you end up with all these, bands that are now legendary, like Cross Canadian Ragweed, or I mean, even like Cody Johnson's kind of a
Yeah.
product of that, where he
Texas.
was an independent solo guy, got his start down there, and he built a massive following in Texas, so big to the point that when he did go to Nashville, he didn't need them at all. He's like, he kind of was, my understanding of how that went is, he's like, if you want to join the party, you're welcome to, but I don't need you. So,
Hmm.
and that was probably one of the first times that an artist has had a, kind of a soapbox like that to stand on when they're dealing with big record companies and stuff. So, anyways, this Texas scene kind of blew up, and I do a lot of work with Texas musicians, but now Texas is pretty established, and people know that those bands exist, and there's big record companies popping up in Austin and stuff like that. So now I kind of look at this Western, this kind of gritty Western scene that we have in Wyoming and Montana. It's kind of the new wild frontier of music that hasn't been found yet, and is still pretty raw and untouched. And who knows what it'll look like in 20 years, you know?
Totally. That's one of the good things about the internet. Your book is self published, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to go through what the big guys say is popular or will sell anymore. There's a democratization with the internet that you can create content that's more authentic, especially if you're willing to go where the stories are, like you are. It's kind of similar to what I do, not in a music sense, but from a journalism storytelling sense. If you go to where the stories are, that content, you can upload it yourself. You don't have to go through anyone. And there's a lot of power in that. You can create your own audience and prove that there's always been an appetite for this stuff. Um, for real stories and work in America, not just what Nashville or Hollywood says is popular. I mean, the whole Yellowstone phenomenon, Taylor Sheridan, he's from Texas and he brought his lifestyle to LA, and now all you see is rip off Yellowstone shows.
Right. Yeah. Everywhere you look. And even I went into Walmart the other day, and I walked past they've got Yellowstone bumper stickers in Walmart, which was
Oh my
just
goodness.
mind blowing to me. But
Yeah,
it's been the whole, yeah, I think you have to, you're obviously taking a risk by sticking your neck out, and people that are movers and shakers and disruptors, they do just that. They disrupt things, and some people don't like that. I mean, there's certainly people that are gonna throw shade at people like that, but that's also how you change entire industries. And I think that's just like you said. That's exactly what Taylor Sheridan did. He kind of came in and did it his way, and it went really well. And now all of a sudden, everybody wants to do that. But I don't think that was. I'm sure he had. I don't know him or know the whole story, but I'm sure he had some massive roadblocks to overcome to really make something like that happen, which has now become kind of industry standard.
totally. Well, it goes like, we've talked about this before, but my whole, experience getting told that this kind of story wasn't marketable or interesting. People don't really care about rural stories, and just finding a way to do it on my own, and proving that whole just the folks in DC wrong, because I do think they're so out of touch with middle and rural America. They have no idea what's important to people out here in the West and the issues that we face, because half the time they're just completely disconnected. That's the same with these kind of, entertainment. Um, I always, going to college in LA, I was kind of shocked to get this sense that most people in my generation and our generation are embarrassed to be Americans. They think that America is kind of, gauche, the ugly American cliche. And I just always felt like if you saw what I saw, if you saw the stories and the people that I grew up with, you would not feel that way. And I think that's starting to emerge a little bit in the last few years, from Yellowstone to this country music revival. We do want real stuff, which is why I think what you're doing is so important, because I don't think there's ever going to be an understanding, a true understanding in our media machine for that kind of authenticity and the willingness to go where it is.
Yeah, I agree, and I think if I've learned anything from the Dusty Vaquero stuff, or even the book, is, you know, the the industry, and if you're doing something different that isn't like a tried and true kind of recipe for something that they know works, then people, I'm not gonna say they look down their nose at you, but they're not really on board. But
Yeah,
really, if it's something that you're passionate about, all you just continue to pursue it until you're undeniable, basically. Like, you have to just be persistent, and um, if there's a will, there's a way. So, if you just keep pursuing what you want to do, like with the stories that you've been writing, that you've been writing them for years now at this point, and they take off, but at first the audience isn't there, and people,
yeah,
it's tough, and it's a lot of days and nights and hours working and stuff where, you probably don't get recognized for not in the way you would hope. But
right.
if you just keep pursuing it, it starts to come.
Yeah, you really got to love it for some reason other than recognition, or it's not going to be sustainable. There's no quick way to do this, and that's not a good way to approach it. You really need to love it no matter how many people are watching, because you have to do it for the love of the story. You're not going to be
Yeah,
sustained on a social media attention. That's not a good reason to
no,
get into this.
I just had this conversation with our mutual friend Chris Malloy when I was out in California. He brought this up, that he gets a lot of he Chris Malloy's a film producer and does a lot of like
Chris
high,
is a legend.
very legendary surfer, cowboy. He produces a lot of very high budget commercials and stuff, and films for people. But Chris has been doing it for 20 years and grinding it out through a lot of it. And he said now, that he's established and gets to do a lot of what he wants to do, he gets these kids showing up on his sets as interns and stuff, and they all want the golden ticket. How did you get to where you are? And it's pretty simple. It's just a decade of grinding, and nobody wants to hear that, because that's not fun, and that's not
Yep.
going to get you there tomorrow. But if you grind for a decade, then all of a sudden, people say, "Oh, you're an overnight success." Well, yeah, they didn't see the decade before that it was all coming together.
Exactly. Chris is so cool. He was the first, I was telling you, he's the first guy ever. I worked as a little creative producer on a project that he was directing. And he is just so genuine, salt of the earth, hardworking, um, even though he is a huge deal. And it gave me a false impression of what people in the film industry are like, because Chris is one of a kind. Most people are not that generous. There's no shortcut to this, because it's about other people's stories. What you're doing is highlighting other artists, and you're doing it through a lens of understanding. A lot of people in the film industry want to make a cowboy movie. I've been getting that a lot lately, and they reach out and they get really enamored with ranching, and they want to make a film about it. And that's great. I think you can agree. That's great that we have more appreciation for that lifestyle. We need that. And sometimes agriculture can be a little too insular and a little too, I don't know, a little self protective. So it's good that there's more interest, but I one time met this guy who put it like it's not about looking at your shadow on the ground of you on a horse. It's about the job, taking care of the land and your animals. If you're doing it because you're into the image, it's just going to be it's going to be shallow and people are going to tell. And that's I think of a lot of what I when I watch your music videos, there's just this authenticity that you can't replicate because there's no way to fake that kind of respect for this lifestyle and those artists. There's no way to shortcut that kind of understanding that you have from your entire career.
Yeah, I'm glad that comes through in the videos because that's something that I certainly try to work on. And a lot of times the locations, I don't necessarily tell this whole story, but just the locations that we shoot in are generally very meaningful to the artist, and
Yeah.
a lot of times it's the ranch that they live on or they work on, or sometimes it's the venue where they played their very first show. And I think that's all part of kind of telling the story of other people. I had this also had this conversation with Chris, that I don't consider myself a filmmaker. I don't consider myself an author. I'm a storyteller, and I love to tell story. I love to tell my stories, and I love to tell other people's stories. And you know, there's different ways of going about that. And so that's with that being kind of the main focus of these songs and stuff like that. Uh, I hope that comes through in the videos, and people can see that we're not sitting down in a music studio in LA or Nashville or New York and recording a studio session. These are um, they're very stripped down, very raw, generally out on the ranch or in a saddle shop or something like that. And it's just the artist and their guitar and a song that they wrote that means a lot to them. And I hope that comes through on in the videos that people see.
What kind of music did you grow up listening to when you were a kid? What was the early exposure to this kind of music that shaped you?
Well, I mean I probably listened to a lot of the 90s country that was just playing on the radio back then. It would have been like Mark Chestnut and Aaron Tippin and Alan Jackson, George Strait, stuff like that. And that was playing on the radio. But I also, my family has nothing to do with agriculture. I didn't come from a ranching or ag background. And so my dad is an old deadhead. And so I also,
That's
growing up,
awesome.
I heard a ton of Grateful Dead and Red Hot Chili Peppers. And the first show I ever went to, I think I was like 4 years old, and my dad couldn't find a babysitter, so he took me to Red Rocks to see the Allman Brothers when I was like four
Nice.
years old. And I don't remember that, but there's pictures of it. But that was my first show ever. So I kind of had a mixture, I guess, of like that typical '90s country, and then the stuff my dad was always listening to, which was a little not cowboy music at all, but stuff I still enjoy. Um, but really, it wasn't until I got into college that I started to meet some kids my freshman year that they had older brothers that had put them on to this kind of red dirt and Texas scene, and that stuff wasn't getting played on the radio. So unless you heard about it from somebody or you were from Oklahoma or Texas, it was kind of hard to find that stuff. And so some of these guys that I lived with in college were getting fed music by their older brothers or cousins or whoever that kind of knew about this stuff. And so my freshman year is really when I took a dive into this more like independent music. And just because it's not being played on the radio doesn't mean it's not good. And about that time too, this streaming really took off as well. So luckily you could find it on Pandora and Spotify and stuff like that, because you would have never heard Cross Canadian Ragweed or Turnpike Troubadours being played on the local FM radio station. So luckily that was available to us, and me and my whole friend group in college, we started getting really into it, and then these bands started getting booked to come up to Laramie, Wyoming, the Cowboy Saloon there, uh, for about 5 years, turned into a really cool venue with a lot of Texas bands stopping through. So that's what opened my eyes, I suppose, to this kind of more underground type of scene. And then, of course, I heard all the like Baxter Black and Dave Stamey and um, Tom Russell, like kind of that old cowboy stuff. I heard a lot of that growing up too when I was working out on people's ranches.
Dave Stamey is such a legend. You have him on some of your videos. California,
Mhm.
what a cool guy. I love him, and all his music is. I feel like he's one of the most underrated people right now.
Yeah, Dave, as far as I'm concerned, is a living legend, and I'm very happy that I've gotten to know him, because I never did get to meet Don Edwards or Baxter Black or some of these guys that are, legendary artists, but they were a little bit before my time, and so in my eyes, Dave Stamey's that guy right now, and so I'm very fortunate to have met him, and he's actually playing my music festival next week.
Right, which is I we got to make sure we spend lots of time talking about that. May 30th through 31st, right? In
That's right.
Gillette, Wyoming, Dusty Vaquero Days. If you are anywhere in the area or you like a road trip, you better go. This is the festival to be at. But yeah, I love that. It's so funny listening to 90s country. I know every single song that comes on the radio. Like I don't even think I know it, but I know every single word. It's
Yeah.
just I wonder what my brain would contain if it wasn't for all that 90s country music. It'd probably be a
Just
lot
taking up
smarter.
real estate.
Right.
Now there's been this whole resurgence of 90s country
Yeah,
music
right.
with like Zach Top and Jake Wirt. I mean, I've heard I know a lot of people love them, and then I also hear the other school of thought that is I would just listen to Alan Jackson if I wanted to hear that, doesn't
Right.
don't fix what ain't broke. So I see both sides of it, but it's certainly it's become popular in the last year or two.
Where do you fall on that? Are you kind of purist about music, or do you have more tolerance for newer sounds in the country space?
Oh, I'm not a purist at all. I guess I will give anything a shot. Um, so I guess I mean there are certain things that I don't really love. Like a lot of the stuff that comes out of Nashville, I think it's getting better now. But 5 years ago when Florida Georgia Line was the biggest thing, and um, it kind of it all got very it all kind of sounded the same, and they were using a lot of the same sounds, writing about the same stuff. They were using a lot of computers to make a lot of that music. It was auto-tuned and backing track and all this other stuff, and which, they probably took a lot of that from other musical genres that were already using that because country music is always way behind everything else. Um, but so I didn't really love that stuff, but I'm all for new sounds and things that are outside the box. Like Zach Bryan came along, and I know now he's kind of a hot button
Hmm.
issue recently, but uh, my manager, one of Zach Bryan's very first shows ever, he played in my manager's garage in Washington like 5 or 6 years ago when he was still in the Navy. He was just some punk kid in the Navy that liked to, you know, pick on his guitar. He was opening a show for the Lowdown Drifters are playing my festival next week as well. Zach Bryan used to open for them,
Wow.
and so he's come a long ways really fast. But I think the greatest thing that he did, and you could say Tyler Childers was also part of this, and Colter's music has kind of always been what it is, but um, all of them didn't really go with that super produced sound. That they kind of made the songwriter cool again, I guess.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that they did that for the industry where it went from this kind of really produced, catchy sounding stuff to let's just strip it down and listen to what these people have to say. And I love that has come back into style.
That's a great point. And it's great again that you have these like independent folks rising up. So now Nashville has to compete with that and they have to pay attention to what people are listening to and it is a little more authentic. Country used to be edgy. I mean, country used to be on the leading edge of stuff like Johnny Cash famously defended Bob Dylan when he was ruffling feathers at the Newport Folk Festival in Rhode Island, and he said, let the kid play, and he was an early supporter of his, one of the greatest songwriters ever. He saw, yeah, he's talented, and there's a lot of room for different types of storytelling, and yeah, I don't. You never want to have so narrow of a view of what's the pure and perfect country music that you miss out on just a great storyteller.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's people like Brennan Green, for example, on my channel. Brennan plays the didgeridoo. I don't think there's anything cowboy about that, but I mean, Brennan is as cowboy as any man I know, and I mean, handy as a glove, but he also likes kind of unique instruments and people love it. He shows up with didgeridoos to his show and picks guitar, but I mean, he's riding Colts 5 days a week and day working. I mean, he's a cowboy, but he thinks outside of the box. And it's the same. There's another gal, Dana Worth, and Dana is a classically trained opera singer, but also I believe she's a sixth generation rancher. So she brings like this whole perfect voice opera sound to music. And I mean, I love it all. I think there's room for all of it when it's authentic. It doesn't really matter necessarily how and what flavor it's portrayed as long as it's authentic music that's being performed.
Yeah, yeah, especially with that songwriting element. So tell me about Dusty Vaquero days. What made you want to take on starting a music festival?
Yeah, I had been since I started doing this Dusty Vaquero stuff, I had always thought, man, it would be really cool to get all of these people I know in one spot at the same time. But I didn't know how to do that other than a music festival. And but I've worked at this point. I've worked a lot of music festivals, been behind the scenes. I see what happens at them, and I always just thought that I was incapable of doing that. And so my friend, he's my friend and my manager, and he kind of helps me out with stuff. But I had mentioned to him, so that would be really cool to do that, but I just don't know. There's so much logistics involved. I'm not sure I could handle that. And he said, well, I've put on music festivals before and I've helped with a lot of them. Let's do it. And I thought, okay, well, if you're going to help me, then let's get after it. So we started planning this music festival in September. Um,
Wow.
so it's only
September
been six
last year.
months.
Wow.
Yeah, September last year. So like six or 7 months of planning total. At the very end of September, we started planning. So it's come together quickly. And I was in deer camp at that time. I was up at like 10, 11,000 feet. Uh, and I made sure to make my camp in a spot that had cell phone service. And so the last part of September and pretty much all of October, I was hunting in the mountains and I would come back after dark when I was done hunting and I would sit down and get on my phone and send out artist contracts and lineups, and a lot of this was planned on my phone from deer camp. So we got things rolling with that, and then we've just kind of been figuring it out as we go because first time doing anything, you're going to make mistakes and nothing will be perfect. So we've already got a long list of things that are going to be different next year. But this year, it's all coming together. And yeah, it's next week. So all the merch has been showing up. We've got all the sponsors lined up, and uh, it's kind of surreal. It doesn't even seem like it's next week that it's happening because I've just been running nonstop trying to plug all these holes and make sure everything's ready to go. But It'll be really cool. It's just a group of every person on the lineup is somebody that I've shot a video with on my YouTube channel, and they're all friends of mine. And there's about 25 acts roughly. Um, 2 days. It's really closer to a day and a half. It's like Friday afternoon, all day Saturday, and it ought to be a lot of fun. There's kind of a songwriter aspect of it where we'll do some songwriter rounds where it's just stripped down and kind of low key, and then there's also some bands there. We've got full bands, and some of them are pretty rock and roll, like Kenny Fiddler and Cowboy Killers, very rock and roll. Lowdown Drifters, very rock and roll. Kellen Smith, pretty dang rock and roll. So what I hope it does is I hope it kind of bridges the gap between the younger crowd that's into this type of music and the kind of established like poetry gatherings and stuff like that, which seem to draw older crowds. I'm hoping that I can be somewhere in between those two.
What made you want to have it in Gillette, Wyoming? Why'd you decide to hold it there?
Well, uh, it, there was there was no chance I was doing it anywhere other than Wyoming. I knew it had to be in Wyoming, and really, the state. I mean, there's just not a ton of infrastructure in this state when it comes to entertainment type stuff. The two options of places where it could be held, in my mind, was in Casper, where they do the college finals, the college rodeo finals, or in Gillette, where they do the high school rodeo finals, because those two facilities can handle thousands of people. Um, and I wanted it to also be a place where we could, I plan to add some rodeos and horse racing and kind of outdoor events that would require like an arena. And so it needed to be a place that had both outdoor space and indoor space. And so those were the two options. And my buddy Kellen Smith is from here in Gillette, and he was the deciding factor really. He was like, "Oh, I know we could do it up here," and he's helped a ton. That like this festival wouldn't have happened without him. So he kind of pushed me towards Gillette, and I'm glad we're doing it here.
Do you have folks coming from all over the place? What kind? Do you have an idea what your audience is going to be like?
Oh yeah, the venue. I was just talking to the venue a couple days ago, and they were very impressed. They said they weren't sure if they'd had an event there in a long time that was drawing people from as far away as this one was. And they said they've been watching the ticket sales, and they're like, man, it's crazy. We'll get ticket sales from Nashville one day, and then we get Oregon the next day, and then Texas, and there's a whole pile of Canadians coming down for it. Um, even my friend Mike is coming over from Sweden just for this. So um, I don't know if there's anybody coming from further away than Sweden, but it's certainly a diverse crowd that's spread out all over the place that's converging on Gillette next week.
So people better go get their tickets now if they haven't
Yeah,
yet.
that's right. And I think last I knew, the VIP tickets are very close to sold out. The GA tickets, there's still some left, so it's not huge push, but they could run out. You never know.
Do you have someone you're really excited to see? Not a fair question, but who are you really looking forward to?
Uh, the thing that I'm probably looking forward to the most is Dave Stamey, but specifically Dave Stamey playing to this crowd because this is going to be a much younger crowd. And Dave Stamey, a lot of his shows and stuff are they're private shows or they're sitting down kind of um, just lower energy stuff, and that's what he's played for a long time. And I talked to Dave at length about this that he it obviously it makes him happy to see a younger generation interested in this type of music. And so to think he was excited to be playing for a younger crowd. So I know Dave's going to be excited. I've also talked to tons of people that are excited, younger people, to see Dave Stamey. So um, I've seen him perform many times, but specifically kind of the atmosphere around him performing to this kind of younger, rowdier crowd. That is probably one of the top things I'm looking forward to.
That's going to be so special. I saw him in Reno in December. I was at a cattlemen's convention. He was there, and it was an older crowd, obviously. So that will be special. I mean, I don't know if Dave Stamey wants to be famous, but he deserves to be huge. This generation should blow him up.
I agree, and yeah, it's gonna be. Apparently, I don't have TikTok, but Dave Stamey was telling me uh, that I guess, I don't know if this is still ongoing, but there was a great debate about whose version of the song "Cowpoke" was better, and they
Mm,
were like pitting Dave Stamey against Colter Wall, who has the better contemporary version of the song "Cowpoke." And so
interesting.
because of that, Dave started to kind of pay attention to social media because he was just reading what people were writing. And so now I don't know that he's checking it all the time, but his team is kind of paying attention to what's happening online. And the really great part about, there's another guy, Gail Stager, that's playing uh, the festival as well. And Gail is an old Arizona cowboy filmmaker. He made a really cool film called um, Ranch Album, and he made that when he was much younger. Um, but both him and Dave, Gail, some of these older guys that are used to playing these kind of more old school gatherings and stuff, they've been nothing but helpful and accommodating because they just want to see it get passed on and continue to live. And so um, they've been a great help and mentors, I guess, in that way. Happy to be a part of things that are maybe not what they're used to or a little bit outside of the box, and they just say, let's try it, let's see what
Yeah.
happens so we can keep this thing going. I mean, I'm sure they both of them probably thought I was about half crazy and didn't know what they were getting into when I asked them to do a YouTube video with me, because I don't know that they certainly don't sit around watching YouTube and you know looking at what's going on there.
The genuine guys, the true artists, they want to bring up the next generation and welcome them in, folks like yourself, because it's about the story and passing it on.
That's certainly true, and I feel like that's also part of getting older and more mature too, because when you're in the thick of it and trying to build something, it can be, whether it's music or film or whatever you're doing, it can be a little bit cutthroat and competitive, but it's really good to have those kind of like almost mentor guys, or that people that came before you, because I've found that oftentimes they're the most willing to help, and they also have the greatest ability to help, I guess, because they're in a spot where they no longer feel like they're competing, and they just want to see whatever art or profession or whatever that you're pursuing, that they want to see it continue on to the next generation. So those guys, that older generation, has been incredibly helpful.
Mm. Yeah, they don't have anything to prove. Dave let us use that song for a documentary I did a couple years ago on West Coast ranching. Someone from our team asked if we could use the song. He just let us use the song. So just super generous of him.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's another good example of just passing it along to the next folk.
Totally. So are you feeling ready for this festival? Are you excited? Are you anxious?
Um, I'm excited for it. Maybe this might be good for my sanity, but there's so much happening, so much stuff to do at the moment, that I don't really get a lot of time to sit down and take in what all is going on.
You don't have
Um,
time to be anxious.
yeah, I don't have time to be anxious. I guess that's a good way to put it. But I'm confident. I think this is there's gonna be wrinkles. I have no doubt, since we've never done it before. But we're gonna learn, and we're gonna roll with the punches. And I think I've made it pretty clear, from the venue to the artists to the vendors, everybody involved. We're all on the same page that this is the first year, and we're learning, and we're just gonna see what we can do with it, and it will only get bigger and better with time. So I think once
You're
this,
gonna go play some music in the Wyoming mountains. Like how At its worst, that's a great day.
Yeah, yeah. And I think once this is all over and the dust kind of settles, then it might kind of sink in, I suppose. What all's gone down. But another thing that I learned when I was traveling and writing my book and stuff is that I'm certainly not the first person to say this, but um, it's all about the journey of getting there, you know. So I'm careful about setting too high of expectations for the finish line of things. You know, I really enjoy the entire process of getting there, and so I am very excited for this to happen. But I've enjoyed all the kind of puzzle that it is to put it together and get everybody in line and just see what happens, and then larger scale, that even once this one's done, I've already got half the lineup made for year two. So as soon as this is over, I might take a week to kind of collect my thoughts, and then it'll be probably straight into next year.
Hmm. What do you want people when they go to this festival to come away with that's different than other festivals out there?
I want people to see that cowboy music and cowboy culture is still alive and well outside of Yellowstone. It's the real stuff is still happening, and I've made a point out of both with the YouTube channel and with the lineup I put together with this. There are some, very established professional musicians that, pay their bills with music. But there's also people that ranch 7 days a week, and there's several people on here that have on the festival that have, played a handful of shows in their entire life, and they've certainly never played an actual festival. So I want to keep it that way, where it's kind of, you have to have the established folks there because one, they're really good time to watch them, but also they kind of draw the crowd. But hopefully, the crowd they draw also appreciates the music of these people that maybe they haven't heard of. And so I hope people leave this festival with a new favorite artist, and I maybe or top five favorite artists, something like that. But I hope people find new music, and really, I just kind of longer term, I think maybe this will be kind of a meeting place for this kind of newer emerging kind of northern western scene.
What would you call that music? Is it like neo outlaw? Like, is there a term to describe? I know what you're talking about. I know that sound. I don't know if I know a name for it, like that Montana, Wyoming.
I like to call it western grit, but
I like
I
that.
don't know. I don't that's certainly not the official name, but I just like kind of I'll refer to it as like western
I
music
like that.
or the western grit.
Western grit. I like that. I think we should use that. And if you can't go to Dusty Vaquero Days, you should. But if you can't, you can get some of this experience on the YouTube page. Is that the best place for people to go to check out what you're doing?
Yeah, like I said, every artist on the lineup is also on the YouTube page, so you can kind of get, if you're going and you want to kind of scout out who's going to be there, you can check out their stuff on YouTube, or if you can't make it, you can check out their stuff there too. And we'll be shooting tons of content and stuff, so even if you can't make it this year, hopefully we do a pretty good job of kind of portraying what it's like to be there. We've got some good help coming in to help shoot content. So that'll all go on Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that. So it'll give. If you can't make it this year, maybe it'll convince you to come next.
And they can find you on Instagram, YouTube, everywhere.
Yeah, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. That's Dusty Vaquero, and then also the Lost Cowboy on both Instagram and
Yes,
Facebook. And the book is on Amazon as well and
that's
Audible.
right. That's right. Did you read it on Audible?
No, my buddy Devin Riley did. He's an old rodeo friend of mine, and he's a podcaster as well, so he had all the equipment to record.
Nice.
And when he brought that up to me about possibly doing the audiobook, I really wanted to do it because so many people were like, man, I don't have time to read. I'm always in the saddle shop or driving or whatever it may be. So I wanted an audio version. And when he offered, I thought that would be perfect because for me personally, I think it took him like 6 or 8 months of working on it, 5 days a
Wow.
week. And I just could not have done that living out of a van and recorded a quality audiobook. So very thankful that he did that, and I think it turned out really good.
Are you putting down roots a little bit in Wyoming for a while? Are you going to be there for a minute, or is just what's your, you've been on the road for a long time?
Yeah, I mean Wyoming has always kind of been my home. It's where I always come back to. Uh, with the festival and a lot of the things that are happening needing to be kind of in person or me close by, I have been I've been here more than I usually would. But as soon as the festival ends, I think I have something planned every single week or weekend for the next 3 months, and it's all over the way. It's from Saskatchewan to Texas. I've got stuff. So as soon as this is done and the dust settles a little bit, I'll be right back on the road, living out of the van.
What's your next like international destination you want to go to? What's high on your list?
Probably, probably top of my list would be Nepal.
Mm.
I'd really like to go over there and check out that area, or just kind of like the Himalayas in general, because they all use. I don't think they eat them because they're Hindu. I believe is what I was told, but they use yaks, kind of as pack animals. So there's these whole herder cultures there in the Himalayas that live and breathe yaks, and I think that would be really cool to go see that culture.
For sure. Huh. You cowboyed in South Africa for a while. How
Mhm.
long were you there?
I've been to South Africa several times. It's probably altogether, I probably spent like 6, 9 months over there total.
And that's in the book, which you guys should get. TheLostCowboy.com?
TheLostCowboy.com. Yep.
LostCowboy.com. You can get it there. But tell me a little bit. I mean, South Africa's in the news right now. We had, some refugees. President Trump is calling them refugees. They're, I think, about 59, 60 families or individuals coming over here. You experienced some of what the tensions are in that part of the world. What was that like when you were there?
Yeah, that was a very real, like everyday part of life, and I honestly was completely naive to the fact that it was going on when I went down there. So when I arrived and I started kind of traveling around to different regions of South Africa, everywhere I went, people were saying, "I can't believe that you would come down here with all these farm murders going on right now." And this was, I guess that was 6 or 7 years ago, probably. Um, but there was some pretty horrible stuff happening where, these rural families living it would they'd be out in the middle of nowhere alone, and people would show up in the middle of the night and kill the whole family, or maybe they wouldn't kill them, but they would run all their cattle into the corral and load them on trailers, and if they tried to stop them, they would shoot at them. So that, I mean, South Africa is a violent place. Um, Farmer or not farmer, there's just a lot of violence down there, and life is cheap. It's also beautiful. I love South Africa. I mean, I don't mean to paint a poor picture, but it's the reality of life down there that, it's the government is not as powerful um as it is here, and the police don't really do as much. Anybody that has money down there, that lives comfortably, spends money on private security
Yeah.
to protect their property because when you call 911 down there, nothing happened. So, um, but it certainly happens, and so yeah, I got to see a lot of that. I lived with several different Afrikaans farmers and ranchers, and they all had different kind of takes on it and whatnot. And but there's a new um, newer political party down there, the EFF, which is the Economic Freedom Fighters, and they're kind of, I don't know if they call themselves socialists, but it's kind of along those lines. I was down there during an election, so I got to see pretty clearly how these different parties kind of present themselves to the public. And something that was very apparent to me with the EFF was their advertising was very, very simple and to the point. You'd see one political banner over here which had all these issues on it and go into great depth about how they were going to fix them. And then you'd see the EFF poster over here and it would have three words on it that, even folks that aren't super educated could easily read from a distance. And it was just very straight and to the point, and I think that political party certainly appealed to probably like the lower income families and people. But one of their big points that they were pushing was they were going to take the land back from these Afrikaans farmers or just white farmers in general, and they were starting to push pretty hard. The thing about South African government is it's not like the U.S. where either your party wins 51% and you got the position or you don't. Down there, it's split up amongst the parties. So
Yeah.
if the EFF won 10% of the vote, they get 10% of the representation in that country as well. So as their percentage grows, so does their power. And so the party that Nelson Mandela founded um, is still certainly the most powerful party down there. But it I think it's slowly losing power to this a little bit. I guess you could say extreme party, or they're not quite as center as 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 what it used to be. And so basically, a lot of what I heard is a lot of these people my age that I was working with, their parents were people that were booted out of Zimbabwe,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
so they saw firsthand or their parents saw firsthand what happened, which this was a very similar situation with Joseph Mugabe in Zimbabwe decades ago, that they kind of ran out the white farmer or I think kind of white folks in general. Um, and that country kind of had some economic problems because I don't know that I'm not going to say it was right or wrong or what they did. I don't know enough about it to really have a super strong opinion. But what followed after that happened was, people using wheelbarrows to haul money to buy a loaf of bread. Like the inflation was crazy and things kind of got out of control. And so the people that I was speaking to down there, some of them had seen that whole kind of downfall in Zimbabwe, and that's what they were worried about. And this was 5 or 6 years ago. So I haven't had that conversation with anybody recently, but that was what people were worried about 5 or 6 years ago, and now it sounds like it's getting closer.
Yeah. Did you ever see when you were down there? Did you see any violence, or were people that you were working with, how were they dealing with that threat?
Yeah, there was violence all around. I mean, death. Something interesting about this is not just Africa, just kind of lower income countries in general. Um, they don't they don't how do I say this? They don't hide from death, I suppose. And there's a book called Life Rider by Laird Hamilton, who's a famous big wave surfer, but he talks about this in like Polynesian cultures and Indian cultures and stuff where they kind of carry around these dead bodies and stuff and they don't hide them from plain view be- because death is a part of life and they're all aware of that. But because of it's kind of hard to convince somebody to work a 40-year career so that they can cash in on their 401k when they're seeing death all the time and they think maybe I won't get there. So in these like countries like the US and Europe and stuff, bodies are scooped up immediately and hidden from the public so you don't see them. That's not the case certainly wasn't the case in Africa. So it was pretty common to see a dead person that had been hit by a car or some kind of somewhat normal accident happens, but they don't get picked up right away. And so there was death and violence all around. There was, big shootout at a taxi rank when I was down there. We had to go pick up the neighbor's kid because he couldn't get home because they had shot up his taxi. And the neighbor on one of the ranches I worked at, he actually shot a guy when I was down there, shot and killed somebody stealing his livestock. And I didn't see it, but it happened on the ranch next door while I was there. And then he tried to take a disc on a tractor and grind the body down into the ground to hide it, which did not work. So he finally turned himself in because he didn't know what else to do. They put him in jail, and he sat there for 3 days. And those cops, this goes to show what the police do in South Africa. The cops never went out there to see what he was talking about. So finally, on the third day, they went out to his farm to try and find this body, and the body was nowhere to be found because the family of the person stealing livestock had come to the farm, picked up the body, taken it home, and buried it already.
Oh my
So they had,
goodness.
even though this guy admitted to killing this livestock thief, uh, they said the cops came back and said we don't know what you're talking about, and just opened the cell and let him go. So
Whoa.
there's certainly a lot of violence down there, and everybody had a story, or especially the Afrikaans folks that I met down there had a story of their brother or cousin or grandpa, something like that, that their family had been killed or they had been held at gunpoint in their own homes. So I mean, it was everywhere. It was very prevalent.
Wow. It's a very complicated place. My one of my best friends is from South Africa and she's English.
I mean, they fought an entire war over it, the Boer War. I don't know that that's really taught in a lot of schools and stuff in the U.S. about the Boer War because uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't remember
I don't
learning
think
about it
so.
in
Mm-mm.
school. I
No.
learned about it afterwards, but they fought a bloody, gruesome war, and the Dutch and the English fighting over that colony back in the day. And so there's plenty of Afrikaans and English people that get along there, but there certainly is kind of that old, that's not been forgotten that their
Right.
great grandparents probably were trying to kill each other. And so there's certain. I went to a farm when I was down there, and we pulled in, and I was with a guy who he had lived in the U.S. and worked as uh, on a combine crew for a couple seasons, so he knew the U.S. a little bit, and so we became pretty good friends. And he wanted to take me to meet his dad, and his dad was probably 80 and lived on a little farm in the middle of nowhere. And we went out there, and he said to his dad, he said, "Dad, this is my friend. He's from the U.S. He doesn't speak Afrikaans, so we're gonna have to speak English." And his dad could speak English perfectly fine, but he just continued to speak in Afrikaans. And eventually, he reminded him again. He said, "Can we speak in English so that he can understand?" And he turned to me, and the only thing he said in English is he said, "I don't speak freaking British," and then went straight back to Afrikaans. So it's certainly the
Wow.
older generation that,
Yeah.
has there's a big divide. But I mean, that's also true with the Zulus and Sutus and Hosas and Swatis and like every different language down there kind of is its own tribe, including Afrikaans and English. So
And there's like
there's
11 languages, something like that.
I think there's 11 official languages, and that doesn't mean there's more than that, but those are the official ones that the government recognizes. Each one has a tribe associated with it. So when I was down there, also, a lot of guys that were in their late 30s, 40s, and early 50s would have pretty distinct scars on their cheeks. And some of them, there'd be like a cross or two lines or something, but clearly put there with a razor blade. And I asked somebody what that was. And pre-apartheid, there was all this tribal war happening down there between I think it was the Zulus and the Sutus that were fighting, but it might have been more tribes involved. But when you traveled, if you weren't marked with your tribal marks, they would just kill you on the road. Like it was a full blown guerrilla kind of civil war, I guess, tribal war. And so that country has a lot of violence going
It's just so much more complicated than the media headline will say. There's just a lot of history.
on. I think that's true anywhere, but certainly South Africa, the history there is long and complicated, and the news that you're going to be fed sitting here in the U.S. reading U.S. headlines is probably not the truth. We get a very, very skewed, biased version of international news here, and so it's. I mean, like BBC sometimes they do a pretty good job of giving you kind of an outsider's point of view. But if you're going to get it from the major news outlets in this country, a lot of times, like they have a way that they want it to be painted. But I
Yeah.
mean, you could spend years diving into just South Africa's history and what's going on down there because it's very long and complicated.
When you lived there, they were pretty worried about these like boar murders, farm murders. They had like a telephone system to try to look out for their community, especially if the police are not going to help.
Yeah, absolutely. They had WhatsApp groups and some of them had cameras installed on the roads and stuff like that. But it was kind of essentially like a neighborhood watch program. And if a truck came down the road that they didn't recognize, they would take a picture of it or just text everybody else and say, "Hey, this white Toyota Hilux just went by. Don't know what it is." And most of the time it was nothing, but they certainly were worried about it enough that they kind of came together and kind of built a network to a community to stay safe from that type of stuff. And it was interesting to see one of my best friends down there. He's a veterinarian and he's Afrikaans, but he grew up speaking Zulu and Sotho. He speaks it just as well as, somebody that grew up speaking that. So he speaks a bunch of different languages. And um, what I learned down there, I'd run into vets, doctors, dentists, a lot of that kind of like higher level education was one of the few, I guess, trades or professions that you could have that would pretty much immediately guarantee you a visa to go live in the US or Australia or Europe. Vets, veterinarians were the only ones out of that group that your vet license would qualify you to practice in Europe or Australia. It did not qualify you in the US, but you could take the tests and then get a visa. But he was telling me basically he's a very highly sought after vet because anybody that is a half decent veterinarian in South Africa, the second they have their degree, they're applying for a visa to leave that place. And so all of the good veterinarians were leaving the country. And because he was one of the very few that stayed that was a young guy, he was really sought after. And he was checking like 60,000 ewes a year. And I mean, he stayed way busy, still is very busy. But I mean, he worked really hard um, to build up that kind of vet practice, I guess. And by the time he was in his mid to late 30s, he had finally bought a chunk of land for his own. He didn't inherit it, he didn't get it from anybody. And so talking to him was interesting. He said, I'm lumped in with everybody else. I worked my tail off to buy this 20 or 40 acres or whatever I've got. And he said, if this comes to fruition that they're going to take this land back, it was all for nothing. And it wasn't because I stole this land or inherited it or anything like that. I worked for this land and bought it with my own money. It will be taken if their plan goes through.
And he stayed to be a vet there when he could have
Yeah,
made that money in another country.
yeah, and he still is there, and I think there's some pretty like hard nosed folks that uh they're rough, tough people, and
Yeah.
there's a group of them that a percentage of them that is going to be unwilling to leave, and so it probably will lead to bloodshed. But there's also quite a few of them that, push comes to shove, they probably will just pick up their families and move somewhere else. But I certainly met some people down there that were they if you're taking them off their land, they will be dead. They're gonna fight it out if it comes down to it.
Wow. We've talked about veterinary stuff before too, because you kind of thought about going to vet school at one point.
Yeah, when I went to University of Wyoming, and I majored in pre-vet and also ag business, and so when I went to college, that was my plan starting out, was that I thought I would go be a veterinarian. About halfway through my undergrad, I realized that it probably wasn't for me, and my grades were not up to snuff. There was upperclassmen that I was friends with that they had better grades than I did, and they were not getting into vet school, so I knew that I was not getting into vet school. So I kind of leaned heavier into the ag business stuff as I went along.
That's a problem though, because grades are not everything, and I don't know that the way that the vet schools are right now, it's a huge problem. I know a lot of people like yourself can do a lot of your own doctoring, and a lot of ranches are fairly self sufficient, but we still have a big shortage of large animal veterinarians and ranch vets and dairy vets. My Both of my parents are veterinarians, and I think I just was at that cattlemen's convention. I was talking to the folks at UC Davis. I think they were saying out of their whole vet class, just one or two are going to be large animal vets, some really low percentage, um, because most folks with the grades go into small animal medicine because you make a lot more money. It's a tough job. It's super physical. My dad travels 3 hours in any direction in his truck, and it's a very, very, very physical job, and it can be dangerous and all the above. And you really, you're not going to necessarily get rich being a large animal vet. You're working with people whose animals are their livelihood, not just their pet, where they're willing to spend whatever on their pet. These are business people, and you're working with their business investment, and they have to make smart decisions at the end of the day. But yeah, something's got to change with the way we're doing vet school, or else we're gonna have a real crisis.
Yeah, our vet that or the vet that my grandpa uses, I guess he's probably about 70 now, and he had this idea because he I would talk to him the whole time when I was still kind of thinking that I might be a vet,
Yeah,
and he would give me advice and stuff like that on what I should do. But he had this idea that he said that he thinks that large animal vet school and small animal vet school need to be separate things because when he was in school, decades ago, it was about 50-50, and there was
yeah,
small animal and large animal. But this was even the case in South Africa when I was talking to my South African friend that he said that, you're competing with people with the best grades in all of undergrad to try and get in, and then they all want to be small animal, just like you said.
yeah,
So, which is fine, but that means there's no spots for the folks that want to focus on
yeah,
large animal, and that means that there's going to be a huge shortage. There already is a huge short. I was just up in Mendocino, and Kendall, that your dad works with, but I had to
yeah,
call her for some stuff, and she was strung out 10 different ways trying to take
yeah.
care of everything, and I can't remember what exactly. I needed something from her, and she's like, "Well, I'll stash this bottle in the bush at this turn off, and you can." But I mean, that's the nature of being a large animal vet nowadays, is
Hmm.
that you have 100 different places that you need to be, and it's not your 24-hour emergency clinics that they come to you. You're
Yeah,
going to them, and there's also things that are, like preg checking and things like that are, people can be certainly be trained to do that aren't vets, but for certain things you need vet certification, and it's almost just kind of lower level stuff, but you still have to do it, and it takes up your time for emergency work and things like that. So
yeah,
the vet world is certainly having some issues, I guess.
yeah,
Like there needs to be some things changed, and it's also veterinarians as a profession have the highest level of suicide of any profession, and it's because they've got $400,000 in student debt when they come out, and it's hard to find jobs, and when you do find them, there's no days off, and
Yeah.
it's a rough way of life.
Yeah. I know. My dad loves it. I mean, he'll tell you how great it is. He absolutely loves what he does. He loves the people he works with. He loves that it's an adventure. Every day is different. And he's a special guy. The older I get, the more I realize not every vet is like him. But he used to. Most people, if they had a really complicated case, they'd have to go to UC Davis, where we are. And so many times my dad would just pull out his old vet school textbook and figure it out and do surgery on the back lawn, some complicated surgery you'd normally have to go to a university to do. And he's actually trying to get someone to take over his practice right now. He'll just give the practice
Yeah.
if he has to, and he can't really find anyone. I think one factor, and I can say this, but a lot of times women, we do really well in school and get the good grades, but it's a tough job. There's obviously women who are great large animal vets, but a lot of it's a physical job. It's dangerous. My mom went in to be a horse vet, but she was like, it's a lot. It's hard on your body, and you're dealing with dangerous animals, dangerous situations. Not everybody has a great setup. A lot of people like to have a horse that they don't touch until the vet comes with needles, and then they want the vet to go catch it, and
Yeah.
little pasture ornament stallions or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a tough job, and I think like a lot of women end up going into small animal medicine, so that it makes the imbalance worse.
Yeah, I would agree. I've seen that a lot, and the guy who does C-sections when we need a C-section on my grandpa's place, the closest vet is probably an hour and a half away. And so the guy who does it, I think he graduated high school, but I'm not entirely sure. But he learned how to do C-sections because when he was riding around when he was a kid with his dad and grandpa, if they ever lost a cow or if they found a cow that had just died given childbirth, they would make him cut the calf out, even if it was dead, just as
Wow.
practice. And so he had that guy who is not a vet probably has more clinical experience than a lot of vets, especially small animal vets. And so but that's what it's come down. I certainly don't condone that. Don't call your neighbor to cut a calf out. But in
Do what
our
you got to do.
situation, I mean, this guy, I've helped this guy cut calves out of
Yeah.
I couldn't even count how many cows, and we've never lost one. He does a really good job.
Yeah.
He's got all the lidocaine and the stitching and
Yeah.
sutures. He gets them from the local vet. I don't know if that's even legal, but we're at a point where there's just not enough vets around. So guys like that kind of emerge. But I don't know if the government, that probably is illegal, and he probably could get in trouble for that because he doesn't
I
have
don't
his
know.
license. I don't know either, but I don't think it should be that way. It shouldn't
No,
be like
it
this
shouldn't be that
underground
way. If it
secretive
is,
thing.
no,
So there's certain, yeah, the vet world is a really tough. I don't regret choosing not to do it. I think I would have really enjoyed the work. I don't think I would have enjoyed what it is nowadays.
yeah, I'm sure it's changed. I think my dad's practice is pretty similar. And yeah, he really, really loves it if you want to hear the positive side. But it's a tough job. And the schools that get government funding, I think they have a responsibility to serve the country, and vets who help agriculture are so important. They have to choose their classes based on who's going down a large animal track. I like your friend's idea of dividing up the schools. That makes a lot of sense too. But yeah,
Right.
it's something has to change for sure. It's every vet I talk to, they're like 60 plus and pretty anxious about what's going to happen to their community when they retire, which a lot of them just aren't retiring, but they kind of need to. There, can't do it
Yeah.
forever. So, South Africa, Sweden, Mexico. What's the most dangerous place you think you've ever cowboyed?
Um, I would say as far as like human beings, uh, it's probably a tie between Mexico and South Africa.
Hmm.
Both of them, there was just a lot of crime and shady stuff going on. So, people wise, probably those two. As far as just existing, um, and animals, Australia.
Why?
Because in Australia, everything wants to kill you. So every dirt tank that the cattle drink out of has crocodiles in it. Everywhere you go, there's snakes that if they bite you, you're dead in 15 minutes. There's jellyfish that are deadly. There's snails that are deadly. On the coast, we were catching bulls right on the coast, so there's bull sharks in all the rivers and also out on the coast itself. And so the animals and the climate in Australia were really deadly. It was also very, you could just die from heat stroke too, because it was very hot up there. So um, that the climate there and the wildlife were probably the most deadly in Australia. But that you didn't really, I mean, you still had to worry about people everywhere, but uh, crime and stuff was worse in South Africa and Mexico.
Yeah. My dad worked in Australia for a while too. He like took a bus to the middle of nowhere and just like went as far in the outback as he could. And he was like, you started to notice every tree, just a tree here, a tree there.
Yeah.
That's about it.
I mean, I think it's something crazy like 90 or 95% of the Australian population lives within 30 miles of the coast. So
Yeah, makes
the
sense.
middle of the continent, there's Alice Springs right in the middle, and other than that, it's just desolate. There's nothing in the middle of that continent.
Wow. I've heard there the they don't like the cowboys and the agricultural part of Australia aren't necessarily as much a part of Australian culture or as beloved as our kind of cowboy culture is here. Did you think that was true when you were there?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, so they call them ringers down there, or they call them cowboys, I guess. But the word, when you hear people in Australia call themselves a cowboy, it's usually because they rodeo and they take that from
Hmm.
rodeo. But folks that just spend their time working livestock call themselves ringers or stockmen. And I would say Australia is probably better than most places that I've been to, that they had a respect for that occupation. Whereas, like in Argentina, for example, gauchos were very much looked down on. Or even Sweden, I don't think people were necessarily insulting, but it also wasn't like a point of pride to be a farmer in Sweden. So, uh, but Australia, yeah, it's not so much ingrained in their culture like it is here. But the guys who do it are very proud of the fact that they do it because it's deadly and
Yeah.
tough, and it's kind of a young man's game over
Yeah. They must be super tough to put up with
there.
those conditions. Why do you think America loves our ag so much? What do you think it is about our country that we love? You know, everyone loves farmers and ranchers and cowboys. We're very enamored with that.
I think uh, a lot of it comes down to a guy named Texas Jack Alejandro, and a lot of people have never heard of him. But he was Buffalo Bill's best friend and partner, and saved Buffalo Bill's life when they were younger and still fighting in range wars. Texas Jack, because Buffalo Bill was kind of a scout and a hunter, and you know, by today's standards, a cowboy, but back then that wasn't really what he was. He was more of a scout. So the so Texas Jack, his best friend, was the first guy to ever bring a rope on stage and do rope tricks and stuff like that, things he had learned driving cows up the trail. And so Texas Jack, he kind of him and Buffalo Bill split when they were in their early 30s when the Wild West show first started taking off. They stayed friends, but Texas Jack thought he could do it better. Buffalo Bill thought he could do it better, so they split their shows. Buffalo Bill did great, Texas Jack did not. But Texas Jack, when he was alive, he was married to the most famous ballerina in the world. So he was this like rough, tough cowboy, essentially being married to the most beautiful woman in the world. And I think
Ladies love
him,
cowboys, even back then.
there you go. I believe she was Russian, and anyways, he brought the cowboy onto the main stage and kind of made it like a cool thing to be. And so like the Roy Rogers and Gene Autry's and like this early kind of cowboys that you would see on TV and hear their music and stuff, that all I think stems back to Texas Jack and him kind of being a cowboy showman and putting it in, making the world or making at least the United States kind of idolize what cowboys were. And so I think it's just come down through our lineage that cowboys are looked at as, honest and hardworking, and, it's kind of overly romanticized, but I think it all kind of stems from him.
That's cool. I never heard that history before. I love
Yeah.
that.
He's
I think,
buried he's buried up in way up high in the mountains in Colorado, and I went to his grave last fall. I think I went to his grave for the first time, and Buffalo Bill's grave is like, you know, 30 feet tall monument and all this stuff. And Texas Jack's grave is a pretty normal headstone, and you'd kind of have to know some history. But you could tell people went out of their way to stop by and see it, but he never got the credit that Buffalo Bill did for kind of making the cowboy cool.
I'm glad he did because I think it's also just like something like Americans want to think of ourselves that way. We want to think of ourselves as like self-reliant and independent and brave and that's our myth. Like going west, that's kind of the soul of the American story in my mind. And you are one of the people I think really keeping it alive for a new generation. So thank you for talking to me, JB. Thank you for everything you're doing. Everybody should go buy your book, The Lost Cowboy. They should follow you on The Lost Cowboy and Dusty Vaquero, and go to Dusty Vaquero Days if you can. This year or next year, whenever you're listening to this, just make it a part of your calendar because I know it's going to be so special.
It's going to be a dang good time. I hope you make it out.
I hope so too. JB, thank you so much. You're the best. Good luck and talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me.